This is Furnace First, a podcast dedicated to exploring issues about health equity in the Southwest, with a special focus on Northern Arizona. I'm Alexandra Samarron. Welcome, and thanks for listening. In this episode, we present our first Health Equity ChitChat, a new segment where we honor the work of queer people and women of color who have produced knowledge that can nurture and guide our actions in advancing health justice in our communities. For each Health Equity ChitChat, co-host Carmenlita and myself will introduce you to readings or literary work from non-traditional, community-driven, and visionary thinkers to guide our conversations. Join us in reflection and learn with us how the arts and non-Western ways of knowing can inform health equity work and research. Hi, Carm. How are you?
Hi, Alexandra. I am doing good. I am Carmenlita Chief. I go by Carmen or Carm, and I am a citizen of the Navajo Nation, so I identify as a Diné woman.
Thanks, Carm. Okay, so today we're going to read the work of scholar Gloria Anzaldúa, and the piece is La Conciencia de la Mestiza Towards a New Consciousness. She was a sixth-generation Chicana who was born in 1942. She was born in a ranch or rancheria in the Rio Valley of South Texas, which is known as El Valle. And basically, she was the daughter of farm workers. She herself worked as a farm worker with her family. There was some inconsistency sometimes growing up in her education because as farm workers, they had to migrate to different locations in Texas and in the Midwest. And so her father decided that it was time to move the family to Hargill, Texas, to provide a better education for his children.
I do have stories about how on my dad's side, my grandmother and my aunts and uncles, I think they were small at the time, but they would actually go through my migratory farm work experience, like traveling from here in northern Arizona and then making their way up towards Idaho. So my dad was actually born in Idaho. They went up there to harvest potatoes. And my dad was actually born in Idaho.
Wow.
Yeah, so, I can find some similarities between just her experiences and some of the experiences in my family as far as, being a Navajo person.
On my end, I am a Mexican immigrant who came to the U.S. as a teenager. But most of my life, I grew up in Mexico. I've read Anzaldúa previously, and now we read this piece. There are so many things that I connect with the way she's thinking about identity and living in a Mexican household and living in the border. When I came to the U.S., I came with my mom, and we lived in Tucson, Arizona, which is 1 hour away from the border. That sentiment of isolation, kind of just feeling like you don't belong, especially in school, is something that, I connect very strongly to some of her own experience. In terms of the context where she grew up, El Valle is pretty much an area characterized by a blend of cultures between the U.S. and Mexican culture. However, these areas, particularly also known as profoundly racist and isolating. For instance, some of the experiences she went through, it was pretty usual for Mexican children, to be physically punished for speaking Spanish outside and inside of the classroom. Mexican culture was considered inferior to the U.S., and identity was pretty much focused on assimilation to U.S. culture and pretty much dispossession of Mexican culture and language. I started reading some articles about how the region of South Texas, specifically El Valle, was one of the hardest hit by COVID-19. And the region is pretty much more than 90% Latino. And a lot of these communities didn't have health insurance, were living in overcrowded housing, and were part of engaging in essential work.
I think what I do want to add for the listeners, first of all, thank you for giving us some time and some space just to break down our, how we relate to the knowledge and the ideas that she is bringing forward, Gloria Anzaldúa, to the work that we do. Alexandra and I, are both in the field of public health, and we also are very engaged in community-engaged research with communities here in the Southwest. And so we wanted to look at and read and absorb experiences and knowledge and philosophies that are being brought forward from scholars, who are people of color, and what they can do to inform our way of approaching the health equity work that we do. Are there new ideas that we can glean? Is there something that we're not quite thinking about that other scholars have already posited forth? Because there's a lot of riches in those. And we also want to use this as a space to really, help others feel comfortable in having these conversations and maybe creating a new understanding how health equity work, how the research that is being done for and with communities in the Southwest, how that, impacts people like us. Because at the end of the day, when we're leaving the institution, we go home. I'm a Navajo woman. I interact in different ways with the world, rather, apart from how I am here and how people receive me here. I first want to start off also by just saying that I think this was a good article to start off with, because it does talk a lot about consciousness. What does that mean when you are coming from a culture that is not the dominant culture? And how do you function? How do you interact? How do you see the world? How do you interpret the things that are going on around you, the things that are being said around you and about you and toward you? And so I think a really good example, we're in a space here at Northern Arizona University, this academic institution where we have very smart, brilliant people who are bringing their skills and their knowledge and, their time and their heart to wanting to build healthier communities. But the thing to understand is that if you come from the dominant culture, I think when you wake up in the morning, you don't have to think about what kind of face you're going to put on, how you're going to talk in order to gain validity and about what you're saying, to get people's attention, to see you as a valid, person in academia.
I think the way in which Anzaldúa is kind of trying to bring in this Mestiza consciousness is a consciousness of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a woman who might be transgressing gender and national borders. But my first question, Carm, basically is, what does psychic restlessness mean to you as an Indigenous, or for me, Mexican woman, in public health and health equity research?
That's a really good question. I'm Navajo. Yeah. I carry with myself a set of experiences. I have had entanglements, regarding race and discrimination before. So it really sets how you are going to approach the day, how you're going to talk with people. And so you're constantly, like she says, constantly having to shift from a certain particular type of consciousness about the world, how you operate, in your own home. That's you, that's your comfort space. And then you're going to work to this institution, and then I have to communicate a certain way. I have to say things a certain way, the code switching that's involved. Correct. That's what that question makes me think about from the get-go, is that there just needs to be common understanding about even that. What is it? What is entailed in even just getting up and getting ready to do this work?
Yeah. No, I love that you shared that in connection to this thing that she calls the psychic restlessness. To me, when I was reading this particular paragraph, and I'll read it, Anzaldúa says, The ambivalence from the clash of voices results in mental and emotional states of perplexity. Internal strife results in insecurity and indecisiveness. The mestiza's dual or multiple personality is plagued by psychic restlessness. When I read that particular section, I was like, oh my God, yes. When she's talking about these multiple personalities and thinking of how much work that has taken, for instance, in my case, to be able to learn how to navigate the academic space and health equity research, which is predominantly dominated by white women, it is tiring. Sometimes I think in my head, I feel that restlessness, that cloudiness, cluttered, that sometimes I just don't know how to separate each of those voices that she's talking about. She's kind of coming to terms that all these voices, all these personalities have to come to like a fluid, cohesive shape.
I think that's what I gravitated most towards. And, this discussion about the psychic restlessness and these what she calls cultural collisions, or these incompatible frames of reference and beliefs. Even with languages, the clashes that are entertained there between English and, other languages that are not considered the dominant. She says it forces one into a state of perpetual transition. And I think that is what it is. You're constantly abuzz, constantly having to be hyper aware of how you are expressing yourself. What kind of face are you bringing forward as a person of color who is also an academic. And then vice versa when you're going back into the community, because, health equity work is very much community engaged and should be community engaged. Even on that front, you have to change to kind of like remember, oh yeah, okay, this is how I act on the res. When I go back home, this is how I'm supposed to sound. I have to dress a certain way because I want people to hear what I'm saying rather than being focused on all of these other things that, detract from the message or detract from that trust building that I'm trying to initiate with them so that we could work together.
In that sense of constant transition, one thing is to be this one researcher of color or from a historically marginalized group, conducting health equity research and engaging in this academic space, and the decisions you have to make to thrive within that space. That's one thing. But then the other thing is that you end up being racialized in very specific ways that inform the responsibilities you're given, the way your role is defined within the institution, and that constant insecurity on my end, constant questioning and doubting, oh, am I here to function as a community liaison, or am I here because of my research skills? What is it that my role is? And then you go out in the community and the intention is to build trust. But then it's this weird dynamic because you're trying to create breach between principal investigators and other students and the community. That bridge entails so much internal labor that it's not often visibilized. Precisely that internal labor is this concept of consciousness, Mestiza consciousness, that constant shift in thoughts and voices and like questions and, so much that happen at an internal level.
Yeah, this actually makes me think about how, if you're a PI or co-PI or, somebody who is in a leadership position overseeing a project, I'm hoping that, you're internalizing this conversation because it very much like impacts the students who are coming from, different cultures, ethnic groups, because it reminds me of not too long ago. I want to say it was just last week. I had a meeting with a group of predominantly Navajo students who are assisting on a research project in which, there's various aspects of cancer prevention to it, and we're working with Navajo communities on it. And right now, we're trying very desperately to just get recruitment activities going, which is super difficult during the COVID pandemic. Navajo Nation has done an incredible job of getting that into control, but there's still a lot of aspects of trying to make sure everything is okay with family, also trying to be there for community. And I think that really does impact what students of color are trying, they're trying desperately to stay on top of their activities, what I need them to do as far as recruitment on this study. But we just used our time last week during our meeting just to have, a heart to heart. And I'm like, can we just have some space where we can share about what is going on? Why are we having such a difficult time with recruitment? And then one by one, the floodgates just started opening I'm just so busy. Worrying about what's going on back home. I have to go back and forth from Tucson or Flagstaff back to the reservation, back to the homelands, and help out there because my commitment as a Navajo person is in that community as well, as much as it is here at the institution on this project because I'm getting paid for it, or I'm a part of some program in which, they're paying for my time to be a part of this project to gain experience and knowledge and all of that. But at the end of the day, we shed that and we still have responsibilities back home. And it's that constant tug on your consciousness. From the research project to what's going on with your cultural expectations, your responsibilities back home.
Yeah, it's that constant balance between honoring that commitment that you have to community and these weird expectations of how things are done in research that may not match where communities are at sometimes. And then the lack of reflection on how that impacts whatever researcher of color or community liaison that is in between the institution and the community. To engage community requires so much relationship building that what we're saying here, it should not just fall on this particular community liaison, but actually researchers and students have the responsibility to engage in relationship building in whichever community they are conducting research in.
I wanted to draw your attention to this other aspect. She says, she focuses a lot on cultural collision, to this psychic restlessness, this constant being in a state of perpetual transition, as she terms it. But at some point, she does say, we can't be forever locked in this combat between the dominant culture and the oppressed culture. She provides us with this visual of, shouting at each other from across opposite banks. But to make this relevant to me, since I come from, Navajo Nation, it would be like shouting at each other from opposite mesas. So at some point, she says, we'll meaning, people who represent the dominant culture or the dominant way of thinking. And also over here on this other end, the non-dominant cultures, we have to at some point stop shouting at each other from opposite banks. And she says, at some point, we'll need to arc onto both sides of either the bank or the mesa. We need to either try to see through both lenses that we have to offer, when we're looking up at a particular issue, or, she says, or we will need to disengage from the dominant culture and venture into a whole new territory. So I guess that makes a segue into this Mestiza consciousness, using this new blending of ideas, thoughts, concepts from various cultures, what they have to offer, not just from the dominant, but from what the local communities have to offer in order to create long sustaining, appropriate, respectful solutions.
Yes, I think there's a section where she talks about being comfortable with having a tolerance for ambiguity. And when I was reading this section that you just reviewed, I was having a lot of reflection, but also a little bit of pushback, because she was talking about, that constant reaction that we may often have, which I think that the majority of my time doing public health and health equity research, it's come from a place of reaction, meaning that I'm constantly fighting back or creating resistance to very Western, white-centric way of conducting research. And I'm constantly reacting to it instead of, I think, what she's trying to say. There's a sentence where she's like, the possibilities of what you end up deciding to do, right, are numerous once we decide to act and not react. What does it mean for me to act and not react? How does that look like for me in health equity research? It really pushed me to think about, okay, if these are all the ways in which people are conducting research, what could be some ways that I can take more ownership based on skills and knowledge that exist within communities? How can I act instead of constantly fighting back and dedicating so much energy to being reactive? Yes. And investing all that energy into actually being creative and being more inventive about how I want to create research, how I want to document inequity and push for social change. Like if you're constantly engaging within these spaces where you're reminded that you don't belong, how much time left and energy do you have to actually have a little space to act or to explore what that looks like?
Yes. I look at that as it's taking time away from your own survival, your way of thriving. Alexandra, where do you see us as researchers in public health being? Are we still shouting at each other to say, no, actually, listen to us because we have this to offer? Or do you feel like we're at a point now where we're kind of toning that down and we're actually trying to understand each other and see through each other's lenses?
Yeah.
Or do you think that actually, like she says, trying to disengage from the prescribed way of, public health and doing public health and trying to venture into a new territory?
In the general sense, maybe, after 2020, I think public health is attempting to engage into these other ways of knowing in an attempt to open up possibilities and act, right? Sometimes I feel like I just want to disengage and write everything off, like she's saying. And I think that will constantly have to be a question that needs to be addressed in any kind of health equity research project. I guess this Mestiza consciousness is kind of helping us think about what are you going to do to find solutions and advance health equity in this case. Are you going to keep uplifting the dominant culture, keep doing things as they are? Or are you going to completely write it off, as Anzaldúa says? Or are you just going to explore some other possibility?
Definitely depends on the group I'm working with, the dynamics at play during that day. Where am I at with this? Are we trying to reach common ground and trying to, respectfully look through each other's lenses? Or am I just done? I'm just done. I'm not being heard. You're not respecting what I have to bring. You're just choosing to see from one reality. Yeah. I think, I try to be hopeful because, that consciousness is embedded in our Navajo philosophical philosophical way of living our lives. We always aim for that positive mindset, grasping for hope. I believe that all we have to cling on to is hope for, healthier communities, for justice, for a balance to the way that our communities are operating and how they're benefiting people, making sure that those benefits are equitable. So I feel like with my generation, we're starting to turn the tide on that and really trying to advocate for our cultural ways of doing things, of problem solving, creating solutions, teaching others how to do things the way that our ancestors have learned to do. So I'm hopeful, and I want to say that we're a little bit beyond trying to see through both lenses. That can be very complicated. Just thinking about self-determination and, from Indigenous sovereignty perspective, I think what we're trying to do with our generation is trying to shift it back to say, hey, we have riches in the way that we can solve these problems and examine them and put a stop to the systemic continuation of why we experience health disparities, why, it's such a struggle to even attain health equity.
I agree with you. I think at a level within me, I am ready to engage in creative, open possibilities. When I was reading this section, she described all reaction is limited by and dependent on what it is reacting against. Because the counterstance stems from a problem with authority, outer as well as inner, it's a step towards liberation from cultural domination. But it is not a way of life. And, when I was reading that, it just kind of made me reflect about, this constant reaction that I've been engaging in, especially in the work that I've been doing at the community level, that often communities who experience inequity are functioning in a state of reactivity to crisis. Again, not leaving enough time for communities to reinvent, be creative, explore how is it that communities want to be healthy. Because there's one crisis after the other, it's such a great burnout. And I think I've realized that in all of the spaces in my life, either at the community level or academic level, I'm constantly reacting to what's coming at me and not really understanding who am I really within this space with all of the identities that I need to bring in. You have to just embrace all of the good and bad parts of yourself in this Mestiza consciousness to really fully understand how is it that you will act.
We're starting to wind down now with our final questions. I think what I would like to do is just, use this moment as you're listening to also think about, when was the last time that you were unquestionably yourself? What elements contributed to that?
Yeah, I think, it is hard for me to think about a time when I was fully myself within the context of public health and health equity research because of COVID, and all of our interactions have been predominantly online. Before COVID, we were working and part of this project where we engaged with hotel housekeepers in Flagstaff to understand their occupational health and safety. And this was a very community-based participatory research. The hotel housekeepers supported us in the design and implementation of the research project. And so every time we would have our meetings, they were all in Spanish. I think that's a huge component that allowed me to feel unquestionably me. You know what I mean? Yes. I think language, it's a big thing.
It's huge.
It is huge. It really adds other levels of cultural relationship depth, a lot of humor. Yeah, we would just be constantly laughing and cracking jokes. And I miss that. I miss that. All Mexican immigrant women. And, I was able to relate to them from a common experience of migration and having an experience of growing up, with a mom who used to work as a housekeeper and engaging with them and all the stories they had. It was just a very fulfilling and very motivating experience every time we would meet with the housekeepers. And it really just opens possibilities of what this work can look like.
Yes, exactly.
And it almost reminds you what the purpose of health equity research and work is. Yeah, so I guess in terms of the components, it's language, culture, being surrounded by people that speak like you, look like you, and that are not constantly questioning who you are, but are just embracing all of you.
And maybe that's where we're trying to move, where that is this is what health equity research looks like, can feel like, sounds like, makes you feel like.
Yeah.
That also triggered a memory where we, on another project, we're also working with Navajo community health representatives, or CHRs. For a lot of them, it was their first time actually being a part of a research team, a public health research team out in the community. And we had so much fun joking, provided that a lot of the students on the team were also Navajo, so they were able to exchange their kinship clans, establish those relationships. So based on certain types of relationships, you can joke with people a certain way. And it just makes it so fun, and you're taking off the armor, I guess, of being an academic. And so they just see you as somebody that they can relate with, and it just makes for a more positive, fun-loving, I guess, if you want to call it that, environment, or, just this atmosphere that you're creating. And I think one of the highest forms of compliment that I heard from not just one of them, there was a few of them who said, "This is so much fun." We're out there having conversations with people about this issue and trying to better understand it so that we can, come up with some solutions. Yeah. But I had no idea this could be research, and when can we do this again? So I think that's what, PIs and leaders of research projects who come from dominant, training on how to do research needs to take that into consideration. When you get that buy-in from the people that you're working with, and you create an atmosphere where it is fun, where people are laughing, in what do you call it? In a respectful manner when it's appropriate. Yeah. I'm not saying that it should be, fun times all the time, because we're dealing with different, very serious topics. Correct. There's a time and place for that. And the more that you engage with the community, you'll know when those times are.
Yeah. If you are a researcher that is engaged in health equity research, you need to build those relationships with the communities that are impacted by that particular issue, and really seeing community as your partners in research and your partners in collecting data, in analyzing the data, and really thinking that all the information in your research doesn't necessarily belong to you. It belongs more to a collective, and what that information tells us about the realities in which some communities live. To finalize things, this last section in the reading, called El Retorno, or the return, she's basically saying that any kind of issue, and let's think in the context of a health inequity that we want to change, she's proposing that we really have to come back to the root. And that root can be a place, can be a group of people. That is such a helpful exercise for health equity research projects, for PIs, research assistants, and coordinators, for community members to collectively engage in a conversation about why do we need to return in advancing health equity? Why is that needed? to return to the root. Where do you return when feeling lost in public health and health equity research? What are the things that you miss? That's like one question with 5.
You're very good at that. Okay, so I'm going to let my heart and my mind briefly guide me through your question, because I really liked the way she ended this, because, we do need to think about what that home base is for everyone involved in health equity, or who is vested in wanting to advance health equity for everyone. To me, this makes me think about how in Navajo culture, when a child is born, we have this practice of the umbilical cord, after it has been separated from the baby and the mother, that umbilical cord is buried somewhere, around the homestead. If you want the child to be very good at like raising animals, you would bury it, near the sheep corral, the horse corral. Or if you want them to be proficient at farming, of course, you would bury it near like the farm, the cornfields. So that always signals at some point, whatever, wherever life takes you, as even if you're taken like far abroad, away from the homelands, you're always going to come home at some point, and you're always going to remember how that contributes to your identity, and how it also reminds you of what your responsibilities are to provide back, all that, based on your experiences, your knowledge, the things that you have gained. How are you going to give back to your family, to your community, and to the next generations? But as researchers, in my own experience, like when I just get so inundated with like the bureaucracies, some of the cultural conflicts, that causes tension, and I just need to break from that. And the way that I do that is I will go out and take a walk into the forest. We live here in Flagstaff, so we're surrounded by the forest, but I need that in order to ground myself and to remember that connection, aside from, all of these things that are imposed on me by the institution and how I'm supposed to go about my work. It helps ground me to remember that relationship that I have with the natural world. And so she does talk about that near the end, about how the only constant in all of this as we progress forward is always going to be the land. And I think that relationship to the land, because that relationship helps kind of not dictate, but it influences our values, our beliefs, are the ways that we do things. I think a final note, what can we contribute or share with people who are a part of like the dominant culture? And I think really, like I said earlier, it's about connection, connection back to community, connection back to the land. And that's very important in health equity work, in doing CBPR, community-based participatory research, is being able to connect, leaving your comfort zone, leaving this institution, leaving the lab, actually going out and creating and forging those relationships, getting to know people, getting to know what they laugh at, what they delight in, what they eat, like what are some of their dreams. It's getting at that Mestiza, like developing that Mestiza consciousness of embracing that there are different realities. Let me immerse myself into this one, and what can I learn from it?
Embrace ambiguity. She says, many feel that whites should help their own people rid themselves of race hatred and fear first. I, for one, choose to use some of my energy to serve as a mediator. I think we need to allow whites to be our allies through our literature, art, corridos, and folk tales. We must share our history with them, so when they set up committees to help Big Mountain Navajos or the Chicano farm workers or los Nicaragüenses, they won't turn people away because of their racial fears and ignorances. They will come to see that they are not helping us, but following our lead.
That is just so on point. I think My favorite part in all of this, and this is probably going to be my final tidbit just to offer to the conversation, is, of course, like, what do I like? What resonated with me the most? And I'm in this space now where I'm all about thinking about like future making and how do we make a future that benefits us and is respectful of our ways of living and knowing and being. Like me speaking as an Indigenous person and Indigenous woman, I'm very interested in the work that it takes and the research that will help inform our futures. And so I just want to read from this little part here because I think she just hits it like just straight on. And I just love this. It talks about the importance of the new consciousness, the Mestiza consciousness, this blending and accepting and being flexible, being comfortable with ambiguity and all of that. So she says, the future will belong to the Mestiza because the future depends on the breaking down of paradigms. It depends on the straddling of two or more cultures. And by creating a new mythos, that is, a change in the way that we perceive reality, the way that we see ourselves, and the ways that we behave, La Mestiza creates a new consciousness.
This is it, you all, for our first Health Equity Chit Chat. I hope you enjoy our discussion. Please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook and let us know your thoughts, ideas. How can this episode inform the research and community work you do? Thank you for listening, and till next time. The Southwest Health Equity Research Collaborative, Community Engagement Core, and the Media Innovation Center at NAU produced this episode. It was edited by Alexandra Samarron Longorio, music from filmmusic.io, song titled Fearless First by Kevin MacLeod, licensed by creativecommons.org. Special thanks to the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, grant number U54 MD01 2388, and Northern Arizona University Southwest Health Equity Research Collaborative for funding this podcast. Thanks to our Fairness First team, Carmenlita Sheaf, Dulce Jimenez, and Alexandra Nicole Olin from the Community Engagement Core, and Brian Rackham, Director of the NAU Media Innovation Center. Thanks for making this podcast possible.